Okay, good afternoon. For those of you who have just joined us, we were doing a little internal business before you came in. We're going to have three brief but I think important presentations this morning, and we'll get right to it. And we'll start with the first one from Superintendent Benjamin Lawsky, who's going to do a presentation on no-fault insurance, which is a very important initiative that he's been working on and we're excited about. Ben?
Thank you, Governor. Let me first just, if I can, update you on what we did yesterday. At your behest, DFS issued a new report yesterday about a huge statewide problem in health insurance, and it is called out-of-network surprise balance billing. What that really means is people do everything they can, especially middle-class New Yorkers, to stay in network when they seek health care, but are being forced out of network. They'll go, for example, to see a surgeon to have their shoulder worked on, do everything they can to have the procedure in network. And it turns out that one of four doctors comes along with the in-network doctor. It's either a pathologist, a radiologist, an anesthesiologist, or a lab. And ultimately, that's an out-of-network bill. This is an incredibly expensive problem for New Yorkers. We laid it out in the report yesterday, and we think there are some significant reforms that are needed, and we look forward to working on those. So that was yesterday's health insurance announcement. Today, we wanted to give you an update on your new administration's initiative to root out auto insurance fraud, which is plaguing our state. Specifically, DFS, at your direction, Governor, is taking a couple of very important, we think, actions. Just as background to the problem, New York, this is how bad this problem is, New York has the fourth highest auto insurance rates in the nation. New York's no-fault system is plagued by fraud, leading to those higher premiums for consumers. Not only are we the fourth highest rates in the nation, we are the second most prevalent fraud. We have the second highest level of fraud in the entire country. And today we are announcing a comprehensive plan to combat abuse of that no-fault system. The massive federal takedown we all saw last week is just the latest example of the prevalence of this crime in New York State. It not only drives up costs for consumers severely, but frankly it presents a very real and present threat to public safety. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, I was doing these types of federal cases back 7, 8 years ago when I was a prosecutor, and they're important to bring, and enforcement is important, but this shows that the fact that we were doing them then and we're doing them now shows that we need more. We need an ongoing, aggressive, and innovative action from not just law enforcement and prosecutors, but also from the regulators. So we're now going to take that action, and we're going to focus on a linchpin in these massive fraud schemes, and that is the corrupt doctors. Just as background, these schemes are complex, they're hard to understand often, and they have many variations, but to state it simply, New York's no-fault law means that when a person is in a car accident, they get $50,000 of coverage for their injuries, regardless of fault, and the insurance company is required to pay those claims quickly. So these fraud rings either stage accidents or they attempt to corrupt real accident victims to claim phantom injuries. But the key thing here is you need a doctor to perpetuate these schemes. The doctor must sign off on the bill for medical treatment to the insurance companies, and we've seen different variations, but doctors, the corrupt doctors, will either, as you see on the screen, either bill for unneeded procedures, bill for procedures not performed, or in many cases rent out their licenses to fraudulent medical mills. Again, this is an enormous cost for insurance companies who lose hundreds of millions of dollars to this fraud, and that sadly just results in much higher premiums for consumers. Again, corrupt medical practitioners are the key. If they are not complicit, the scam can't work. I like to say that if you think of these schemes as an octopus, you can cut off any arm down below and that arm grows back. But if you cut off the head of the octopus, the entire octopus dies and the scheme and the fraud goes away. And so we are focused on...
Graphic metaphor.
Graphic, yes. We are graphically taking two major regulatory actions today. First, we have identified about 135 doctors across the state based on their billing practices and other behaviors who have significant red flags of fraud. We are, now that we've identified them, we are sending administrative demands for information to all of them, asking for all kinds of information, but including proof that the doctor or other medical practitioner owns and operates the practice, and the responses will help identify corrupt practitioners. If they fail to respond, they will be banned from the no-fault system. And that leads me to how are you going to ban them from the system? That leads me to my next action that we're taking today. We are issuing a new no-fault regulation. DFS will be empowered to ban corrupt doctors from the no-fault system. We will work closely with Dr. Shah and DOH, of course, and as well as SED. And doctors suspected of fraud will be reported to Dr. Shah and to SED for review of their licenses and possible revocation. I think it's important to point out that in 2005, a law was passed giving us the ability to do this, to set up a mechanism to get these doctors, these dirty doctors, out of the no-fault system. And until today, a regulation allowing us to do this has never been issued. We are going to do that now. And again, if you cut off the head, that does a lot for the fraud. Thank you, Governor.
On that is inarguable. Cutting off the head normally accomplishes a lot of things. The DFS you can ban a doctor from the no-fault system. It's not a licensing of the doctor, but you can ban him yourself from participating in the no-fault system.
Absolutely, and then we refer for license revocation to Dr. Shah, DOH, and SED.
Great. Great. Any comments on this? Questions? Dr. Shaw, what do you think of it?
You know, there's a few bad eggs. If you remember, there's over 70,000 doctors in the state. So if it's just a few bad eggs, you get rid of them.
I meant to add that as a son, as the son of a retired doctor, I should say there are, most doctors in this state are wonderful.
You may be a son of a doctor, but he's a doctor. Anything else on this? Okay, moving right along. We're going to turn it over to Howard Glazer, Director of Operations, and Barry Sample, Deputy Director of Operations, who have a creative and, I think, exciting proposal that they're going to talk to us about.
And also free of violent metaphors. Well, Governor, of course, you've traveled very extensively across the state. As Governor, Attorney General, you've been to every county in the state. And you've spoken very frequently and eloquently about the state's history, the leadership that we've shown, New York in industry and technology and political history, civil rights, and women's rights. You asked us to think about ways to promote New York State history as a driver of tourism and economic development, take history out of the museum, if you will. You've seen that process right here at the Empire State Plaza, also in the state capitol, right here on the hallway in the Hall of Governors. Anecdotally, there are definitely more people in the Capitol, in the hallway. They spend a longer period of time here. It's really been a dramatic effect. We've asked Barry Sample, our Deputy Director of State Operations, working with Mark Shamming, our Director of the New York State Museum, to lead an effort to develop a new concept. It's a concept at this point for reimagining the New York State Thruway, which is central to the transportation corridors of the state, as a reimagined pathway through history. 250 million trips per year are made on the New York State Thruway, as Tom Madison knows, because he gave me that number. And as much as we like them on the Thruway, we also want them off the Thruway. We want them visiting our communities, eating in our restaurants, staying overnight in our hotels, and visiting our historic sites. We think that history and New York State's unique role, our rich history, can be a driver in doing that. So let me ask Barry Sample to take you through what he's been working on.
Thank you, Governor. We've often overlooked the value of history as a resource. And Howard was referring to people who visit the Hall of Governors. You have people who come into this building who have been state workers for 30, 35, and 40 years, have never come into the governor's office. A few days ago, there was a woman who was an OGS worker, had been at OGS for 30 years, had never been in the Capitol, but she was here to see the Black History Month exhibit. Why was she here to see the Black History Month exhibit? Because her grandson, his class had been there earlier in the week. So there's a continuum in terms of how it penetrates individuals, but also penetrates into the community. But we're also looking at the potential for history as an economic development resource. Tourism and its economic impact in New York State. New York State tourism generated $6.5 billion in state and local revenue in 2010. Tourism is the 5th largest private sector employer in New York State on the basis of direct tourism employment. And approximately 1 in 13 of all private employment in New York State are sustained by tourism. Dr. Kenneth Jackson of Columbia University has looked at the issue of the nexus between New York State history, not just history in general, but New York State history, and its marketability as an economic development tool. And he states, the state has more museums, more curators, more historical societies, more exhibition halls, and more colleges and universities than any other state. It also has more than a dozen urban cultural parks, more than 300 historic districts, and more than 1,000 architectural landmarks and monuments. This is a resource that has been significantly underutilized. Our initiative is, we're starting with the New York State Thruway as a corridor or path through history, but we're not limiting to that. The Northway is included into our program plan and the Southern Tier. But we are starting with the New York State Thruway, and we're going to do a few things, and we're starting with what we're calling a signage program. How can we better serve the traveling public in terms of identification of sites and locations that are off of the Thruway and access to them to various parts of New York State? As an aspect of that, we're going to improve and expand and enhance the current kiosk you see at service area rest stops, but include more historical information in addition to the traditional tourist information that individuals will have access to. We're going to customize what we call Path Through History, which is essentially you could go online and you can pick an area that you want to visit. You can pick a type of history you want to survey, the suffrage movement, the abolitionist movement, the Underground Railroad, and that information would come out that would provide you with the locations that you can explore in a specific geographic area. But in addition to that, you would have information on shopping in the area, restaurants in the area, and overnight that you can do in those areas. We cannot have a successful program if we limit the signage to what we have on the Thruway. You get off the exit, then you need to know where to go for the particular sites that you're looking to see. So we'll be working with DOT, and we'll be working with localities in terms of improving and enhancing that directional signage that would be needed for those locations. In order to provide us guidance in doing this, we have a group of historians that are providing us some direction, led by Harold Holzer and Mark Shamming from the New York State Museum, Harold Holzer from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Supplement, additional members of the task force are Robert Webble from the New York State Museum, Robert Harris from Cornell University, who was instrumental in our Black History Month exhibit, Dr. Kenneth Jackson of Columbia University, who's probably the most renowned individual in the country in terms of the relationship between economic development and historical sites. Dr. Lisa Keller from Purchase, and of course, Howard Milstein, the chair of the New York State Thruway Authority Board. We've been tinkering with a number of new looks on the signs that you'd see and sites that you'd see on the Thruway, trying to get some consistency there. trying to identify what you would see in a specific region to point you in a different direction. Some people, you can go up the thruway and you could identify what manufacturing sites had been in certain areas over time, what other historical sites have happened over time. And using the thruway, the northway, and the southern tier as a pathway to those locations. Thank you.
You've got a life-size mock-up. As Barry mentioned, these are concepts at this point, and so we're going to be relying on the history panel to give us an idea of what works best, as well as making sure that safety is also taken into account. You can't have too many words in the sign, so you've got to be able to communicate it easily and quickly and in a graphic manner. So just an example, Governor, of what we're looking at, and we'll be finalizing this in the coming months as well.
And we've turned John Howard into our in-house historian. He was the most instrumental person in the Hall of Governors and also providing guidance for our Black History Month. You know, you had the guys on the floor asking me questions that I didn't know. You know,
Barry, do we think that by doing the signage across the state, it will actually truly help to promote economic development and actually at these historic sites?
Well, as Kenneth Jackson says, not only identifying the sites, you have to have a marketing program. You have to link the identification of the sites, identifying the historical importance of it with a marketing program. If you do not have an effective marketing program, the economic benefits will not necessarily be realized.
Any other questions for Barry on this? It's exciting. I think it's a really exciting concept. It can work in all sorts of ways. It's economic development. It's also education. You know, it's also for people who spend as much time on the thruway as this group does. You know, you learn something besides just where the McDonald's are. So, great. Okay, last presentation will be from Irene Baker, who's head of Cabinet Affairs. There was not a Cabinet Affairs function before, I think. It was something that we brought when I was in the federal government. I was very aware of the Cabinet Affairs function, the Cabinet Secretary, because that was be the person who would call you up and say, we need you to go to Omaha tonight. I love that person. Irene Baker, please.
Thank you, Governor, and good afternoon. Last year, Governor, you asked your cabinet to get out of Albany and get on the road for the People's First Tour. It was a new way of engaging New Yorkers in their government and having senior administration officials take your message of reform and transparency out on the road and directly to the people. As you have said so many times, the people get it. And their involvement led to the passage of historic bipartisan reforms last year: property tax cap, ethics reform, rent regulation, marriage equality, just to highlight a few. This year, the people are still first, and our commissioners and senior staff, who so anxiously await my phone call, have been crisscrossing the state to encourage all New Yorkers to remain dynamic participants in their government with the New York Get Involved campaign. We've continued to ask our citizens to work with us and get this budget passed, because as you said in your State of the State and budget messages, this is not just a budget. This is a reform plan. And we're asking New Yorkers to join our efforts to change the status quo. We've been talking with New Yorkers about maintaining fiscal responsibility, the New York Works Infrastructure Fund, teacher evaluations, mandate relief, pension reform, the importance of expanding our DNA data bank, and the middle-class tax cut. The people around this table have shown tireless energy and enthusiasm to get on the road again and again and again. And over the last 8 weeks, have traveled hundreds, and I would even say thousands of miles collectively to talk to New Yorkers. By this Friday, 20 members of our administration will have visited over 200 cities, towns, and villages in every single county in the state. You, Governor, have gone from Yonkers to Queens to Buffalo, and as you mentioned earlier, just this week we're in Utica with Commissioner DeStito. Lieutenant Governor Duffy, our ultimate road warrior, drove over 200 miles in one day to host 3 mandate relief events in 3 separate regions, so the rest of you cannot complain. A few other fun facts for those of us who are keeping score. President Matt Driscoll has been to every county in central New York. He may claim twice, but I don't know about that. Director Brian Stratton is the only commissioner to do all of his events in unique counties. So he did 11 events in 11 different counties in 5 different regions. We have been to every region, but some commissioners have actually hit exactly half of the region themselves. Commissioner DeStito, Ken Adams, Commissioner Burke, and Secretary Perales have all been to at least half of the regions. We have talked to 10,000 citizens. 10,000 citizens have been to our events across the state, and we've reached so many more. We've met with them in person, we've been on their local radio stations, and we've met with editorial boards in every single region. We will talk to whoever will talk to us. And no forum is too big or too small. Over 40 editorial boards have had conversations with you, Governor, and our commissioners, from the New York Times to the Malone Telegram, the Jamestown Post-Journal, and Corning Leader. We want to get your message out, but more importantly, get people involved in their government. But now, what people really want to know. Who has racked up the most mileage and earned the title of fiercest road warrior? Now, this is a tough competition, and our winner had several of their colleagues, I won't say him or her, nipping at her heels. But
You just said her.
girl power. The second runner-up is Commissioner Darrell Towns, who hosted 15 events across the state. Our first runner-up is Commissioner Ken Adams, who could not be with us today because he has 2 events. I think it was a last-ditch effort to steal the crown, but he ended up with 22 events. So, who was it who finally prevailed? That honor goes to Commissioner Roanne DeStito. Who, after introducing the governor in Utica this week, has completed 25 events. Wow. Yes. So, let me tell you what she's won for all of her efforts, and Howard is not going to be the only one with props. So, I need my list, though, because there's a lot of stuff in here. First of all, we've got your emergency roadside assistance kit, so you are ready for any roadside emergency. We have got your coffee mug, so you can stay awake on the road. We have got, hold on, your portable BlackBerry charger adapter, so you can stay in touch constantly, but never, ever, ever text and drive. We also have your neck pillow, because despite popular belief, we do let our commissioners sleep, but only sometimes and only at rest stops. And then last but not least, you've got your travel essentials kit, because we have to maintain our appearances despite logging hundreds of miles on the road. And you get the bag too. So, but wait, that's not all. You recently heard about our website, nysstore.com, where we are selling all sorts of unneeded vehicles and, all this excess inventory that, Roanne and Howard are accumulating. Basically, we took a look at that site and we put a bid on eBay for this fantastic car that's going to keep you on the road for our next tour. But, just so Commissioners Adams and Towns don't feel like they are being left out and their efforts are going unrewarded, for them, we have special audio editions of a book called Crossroads, The Future of American Politics by Andrew Cuomo, to keep you inspired as you drive around the state. Now, these were recorded just for you, so don't try and buy them in stores. They're collector's editions. So enjoy, and commissioners, do not unpack your suitcases.
Well done. Real congratulations, Roanne. And very well done, Irene, really well done. But on a serious note, the whole effort was, we had set as a goal in the State of the State that we would do 200 events. We surpassed that. And I know it's a lot of work. I also know it works. It worked last year. It's working this year. If the dialogue is in this building, we lose and the people lose. And the only way to make the process work is to get to the communities, talk to the people, and then it bubbles up. To torture the boxing metaphors for some reason today. There's a boxing metaphor: if you go to the body, the head will follow, right? If you punch the body, the head will follow. Well, if you go to the people, the politicians will follow. I believe that, and that's what we've done here. We've done it extraordinarily well. So thank you very much. Anyone want to question the calculus that made Rowan the winner, or please feel free. But well done all. On that note, any questions from the press?
There are some who said that there's no point in negotiating with the unions on Tier 6. I know that you've had an open dialogue with them. Is your sense that they would support anything at all, or are you in the legislature really just have to go along on this?
Here is the problem on that point, and I think it's been misunderstood. The unions, we just finished negotiating, quote unquote, with our public employee unions, salaries, benefits, et cetera. And we did contracts, the contracts were ratified. Pensions are not subject to collective bargaining negotiation. So you can't negotiate a pension in the collective bargaining. If you just finished negotiating the contract, if someone says, well, go negotiate the pension with the unions, and I'll only pass pension reform if the union agrees, there's nothing left to negotiate with the union because it's not subject to collective bargaining. So that's the point there. There's just, and by definition, the unions don't want a reform that would diminish a pension benefit. So the answer is always going to be no. And if, so that was the point on that.
Governor, as a follow-up to that, Governor Patterson did secure a memorandum of understanding about Tier 5. I think he promised no layoffs for about 2 years. Several key legislators, including the Speaker, said that they won't sign off on this unless the unions agree to it. And I know you met on Tuesday evening with union leaders. So are you going to seek their acquiescence?
Well, if the legislature requires acquiescence, it will not happen. Now, Tier 5 was negotiated by the governor with layoffs, but we have just finished negotiating layoffs and everything else in our contract discussions, which were just ratified a few months ago. So there are no open items left in our discussions with the unions.
Can you talk a little bit about what you guys did discuss on Tuesday? Did they come to the table with ideas that you could share?
I mean, we are, well, first, there are a number, I'm talking about the budget with many different groups and many different labor groups. And depending on the union, they are more or less interested in different parts of the budget. Some unions are very interested in the infrastructure piece. Some unions are talking about the Tappan Zee piece. The public unions are talking about pension reform. So it depends on which union you're talking about. But I'm talking about the budget. I'm explaining the budget, explaining the rationale, and we're just having a dialogue.
Have you made any progress on pension discussions with the legislative leaders, and do you still plan to put it in some kind of extender if there's no deal within the budget?
Ken, it's in the budget, and I've said all along, the budget is the budget, and if we come to a resolution with the legislature, fine. Otherwise, the alternative mechanism is through extenders. I said that last year, I said it this year.
But have you made progress, or do you feel you're making progress in your talks with the legislature?
You know how it works here better than I in some ways. It's many ongoing discussions, and then the situation either comes together at the end or it doesn't come together at the end. And we're not really at the end yet, so.
Governor, is the window still open for not just an on-time budget, but an early budget by March 22nd, as some people put that target?
You know, the legislature puts out a calendar. By the calendar, it's a budget that is on time or maybe a couple of days early by their schedule. The question is, do they keep to their schedule? And that I don't know, Nick, you know. It's, it's what I just said to Ken. You have conversations all session long, but nothing really gets serious, and you don't really know until the end, you know. Albany is funny that way. Doesn't matter what time the trains leave, they all arrive at the station at the same time, you know. So you're having multiple conversations, but they all really become ripe at the end, and we're not really at the end yet. We're having positive conversations. Are all the conversations positive? Yes. But as I've said repeatedly, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing it, I don't put any stock in that. They're productive, positive conversations. But until you pass the goal line, to me, nothing matters.
The conference today said he's still holding out hope that you would create an independent panel for redistricting. Is that too late? And the mayor actually said that that's what he feels is your commitment that you made as a candidate.
You know, Mike, I have great respect for Mayor Koch on many levels. I've been admiring him for many, many years. 1977. My father's career, early career especially, was intertwined with Mayor Koch. Let's use that word, intertwined. 1977, both ran for mayor of the city of New York. Ed Koch obviously won. 1982, Ed Koch is now mayor. Mario Cuomo had become lieutenant governor. They run against each other for governor. Mario Cuomo wins. So I have tremendous respect for the mayor. I have tremendous respect for what he's done here. I haven't heard about his suggestion, Mike, but if your characterization of it is accurate, which I'm sure it is, I think we have, I don't know that we need more panels right now. The court has appointed a panel. So I don't know that, I believe the court has appointed a 3-person panel, and we have a magistrate. So I don't know that we need another panel now, if that's the issue.
And the mayor was saying that he thought that you had to fulfill your campaign promise to him, to his organization, that you have to require some kind of independent redistricting. Do you feel you need to do that to satisfy that promise?
Well, look, I've been arguing for independent redistricting for many, many, many months and years. We are where we are now. We have an independent panel, and it may very well come, which is the court panel, and it may very well come to a situation where the court does the lines. I mean, that's a very real option, and I think that's going to be between the legislature and the courts.
Governor, in that court panel, there was a question about whether incumbency should be considered, particularly incumbent residents should be considered in drawing the lines. And the legislators argued yes, and some people argued no. And your attorney didn't advance an argument. I'm wondering, why was that, and do you think that allowing for incumbent residency should be a consideration of these court panels?
I'll leave that, Jimmy, to the courts. That's why we didn't take a position. It's between the courts and the legislature, and we'll leave it there.
Governor, yesterday the Senate came out with a plan to cut some business taxes and cap state spending percent, require a state spending increase of 2% and require a supermajority for tax increases. Well, I was wondering what you thought of that.
I haven't seen the plan, but in favor, you know my policies and what we've been trying to do. We cut taxes on the middle class to the lowest level in 58 years. We rolled back the MTA surcharge, which we thought was very onerous on small businesses. The question then becomes the trade-off, you know, cut taxes and cut what? And that's the second part of the equation. But I haven't reviewed the Senate plan.
Governor, back on pension reform,
Senate and Assembly lines are, I think, hyper-political or hyper-partisan.
I think I said both, actually, just for variety, Tom, you know.
So I don't think you've ever said specifically what they need to do in their revised lines. Could you say specifically what
They can no longer be hyper-political or hyper-partisan.
Can you define that maybe then?
Nope, but it's, I'll know it when I see it.
Governor, as a follow-up, one of the things the government groups say makes those lines hyper-political is accounting for this incumbency. So why didn't you advance an argument in court on that front?
Well, that would assume that I accept their premise.
Well, you were a party to the case. You had standing to
Yes.
argue either for or against, but you didn't argue against it. And I'm wondering why, or would you argue for it?
Well, it's a legal question if you believe the law allows you to take incumbency into protection, which, by the way, if you look at the lines that the magistrate drew, it would appear that she took incumbency into consideration because it can't be a coincidence that almost all the districts wound up the same, right? I mean, you look at the map, what is the deviation in the magistrate's map from the prior maps? Almost every incumbent has the same district. How can it be unless she took it into consideration? Which is a decision to be made by the courts.
Have you sensed that since those maps came out, that the legislature is more inclined to strike a deal with you or with each other? Or do you still think that there's a possibility or a good possibility that these court lines will stand?
You know, Ken, I don't know. I don't have a sense. I think they're focusing on the congressional lines, which are obviously the first order of business. The congressional election is first under the current schedule. The judge is focused on the congressional lines. So I think they're going back and forth on the congressional lines. I have no idea what the outcome will be on the congressional lines. I have no idea what the outcome will be on the Senate and the Assembly lines. It's in their control. They know what I'm looking for, and they'll decide what they want to do.
Just as a follow-up, could you strike a deal with the legislature where if they don't come to agreement on congressional lines and that ends up going to the courts, but they strike a deal on the state lines and a potential constitutional amendment, would that be enough to satisfy you? Or do you want the congressional agreement as well?
It's not an issue that we've talked to about them, with them. I think the congressional lines are being handled separately than the state and the assembly lines by the court, obviously. So I could see where they would be two separate matters.
As you know, complicating all of this is the fact that we've got different primary dates for the state and congressional elections. I know you've said more or less at this point that you're trying to stay above the fray on this, but there's a renewed push to get a unified primary date. As we approach towards the end of the session, towards the end of the budget, do you expect to insert yourself into that debate and try to get a unified
You know,
primary?
Nick, I have said repeatedly that I believe there should be a unified date. Depending on whose number you use, it could cost $50 million to local governments. We're doing everything we can to save money for local governments. We're working very hard to get mandate relief. Why you would gratuitously want to impose a $50 million cost on local governments just because you can't agree on a single election makes no sense to me. I've said that to them publicly. I've said that to them privately. Their politics is winning the day now, but I don't think it makes any sense from the taxpayer's point of view.
Do you plan to advocate for a specific primary date, though?
I'm not going to dictate their politics to them, but I have been advocating strongly for a single election date. Just pick it.
Governor, what do you think of the constitutional amendment that the legislature is considering right now?
We are talking to them about it, and those conversations are ongoing, as I said, Karen, but you know, you're not there until you're there, and you don't know if you're going to get there until the clock tolls.
Governor, just a follow-up to that, there was grumbling this week about having the legislature have the final say over negotiation over that constitutional amendment. Would you support that?
I'm not going to negotiate the constitutional amendment with you, with all due respect, but we're having active conversations.
But do you think it has, just to follow up, do you think it has to be stronger than, it seems like now it's just going to let the legislature do what they already do, draw the lines.
Well, that wouldn't be acceptable, obviously, if that's what it was. Yeah.
Governor, the Senate Republicans have expressed reservations about the health exchange in the budget, and both about its costs and about wanting to wait until the Supreme Court makes a decision on the Affordable Care Act, which wouldn't be until sometime in June. Will you sign a budget that doesn't include the health exchange?
It is now in the budget, and I disagree with the Republicans on that strongly. I did last year also. I think we made a mistake last year in not passing it. I think it would be a terrible mistake this year if we didn't pass it. I'm going to do everything I can do to make sure it actually passes.
I got a couple of follow-ups on pension reform. If I may.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to decouple pension reform from the budget?
It is in the budget now, and as I said, it's in the budget, and I said from day one, I think it's a vital part of the budget. Look, pension reform, you tend to focus on the politics of it. We have a crisis in this state. You all saw in the newspapers about the situation that Suffolk is in. You have local governments that are really teetering financially. And you look at the cost of the pension system and the increase in the pension system, it is just unaffordable. There's no political debate or policy debate or ideological debate. It's a question of numbers. Would it be nice to do? Yes, but you can't afford it. That's why all these things are a trade-off. Do you support this? Do you support this? I support everything. I support all nice things. The question becomes, can you afford it? Can you pay for it? And we can't afford this level of public pensions, period, on the numbers.
My question is, would you be willing to decouple it from the budget?
It's in the budget. If I were willing to do that, why do I have it in the budget?
Well, a lot of things get negotiated and changed.
Oh, so you're saying, would I ultimately, as part of some negotiation, conclude otherwise?
Or would you rule out decoupling it from the budget?
It's in the budget, Eric. And it is vital in the budget.
As a follow-up, DC 37 put out a monthly newsletter today likening your pension reform plan to George W. Bush and, quote, right-wing Republicans' plan to privatize Social Security. Just putting it out there for you to see if you want to respond.
I guess they oppose the pension reform plan. I have divined that from that statement.
Governor, as the market's recovered, doesn't the pension plan become more affordable as the increases that we're seeing start to flatten out?
Is the market going to recover? Are the revenues going up next year? By what percent? Well, you don't know? Neither do I. That's why you can't say. By this, in this economy, at this rate of growth, on these numbers, it's grossly unaffordable. And you would need a dramatic turnaround in the economy, and it would need to be a sustained turnaround in the economy that you were confident was going to continue. And there's not a single economist that I can find of any weight that will make that statement.
Governor, the U.S. Surgeon General has issued a major report on teen smoking. And one of the things they say is that states are cutting back on tobacco control programs. You've cut back now 2 years in a row. I'm just wondering, is that just a dollar thing? Is it just because of the budget situation? Or do you think those programs don't work?
It's a dollar thing. It's cost. It's what I said before, Tom. A lot of, when we go through the budget, many of the people in this room, we have the same conversation repeatedly. This would be a great thing to do. It would be a good thing to do. Be an innovative thing to do. Good. Now, how do we pay for it? There's no doubt that whatever we can do to stop teens from smoking, we want to do. It's a cost item.
What do you make of the fact that in Buffalo, the teachers' union rejected the evaluation deal?
There's, again, the evaluation deal is a controversial situation, Ken. It's controversial in New York City. It's going to be controversial all across the state. That's why we put the incentive, well, let's take a step back. It's why it hasn't happened for the past 2 years, right? That's why we won the race to the top money 2 years ago, and we were unable to get the evaluation system in place statewide. We crossed the first hurdle because a lot of people worked very hard and put the differences aside. Now the second hurdle is going to be the local districts, and that's why we put the incentive in there in the budget for 4% additional funding only for those local districts that have an evaluation plan in place. But it's going to be difficult. I'm not surprised by that.
Governor, with Sunshine Week coming up soon, do you feel like you've reached your campaign promise of making this the most transparent government in history?
I think we're well underway to that goal.
Governor, unions are on the air claiming that your Tier 6 proposal would cut benefits for future government workers by 40%. And there are others, as I'm sure you know, who claim the number is closer to 17%. Has your administration calculated a number?
We can get you numbers as to what, Bob Magna can get you numbers as to what we believe the cost is.
Governor, you said several months ago that you were open to revisiting your stance on medicinal marijuana. Have you revisited that, and has it changed at all?
We have not, I have not revisited it at this time, no.
Do you plan on revisiting it, researching further? I mean,
We have research that is going on, and we are reviewing it, but we have no conclusion.
Do you support mixed martial arts legalization in New York?
Only in a setting like this?
The Senate has pushed for it every year in its budget.
I don't believe I've taken an official position on mixed martial arts. Have we said anything? Does anyone know? Right, this is the ring. This is the octagon.
But do you think it would raise money for the state? There's this argument that it would help bring in tourism and economic development money. You've talked about economic development. Is this something you've given serious consideration? Obviously, you haven't proposed it. You haven't really spoken out. The feeling is that you do oppose it. Is that accurate?
Well, I don't think there should be a feeling of my position one way or the other. We haven't really reviewed it, Ken, and we don't have a position. I understand the proponents argue it would be an economic development vehicle, and we need economic development, so I understand the potential appeal, but I've not gone through it specifically.
Governor, the Defense Department is proposing a cut at the Niagara Falls Air Reserve Base. I believe your Lieutenant Governor was actually down in D.C. to discuss this. Any update that you can provide on that situation?
We don't have an update now. It's a very serious condition for the state. We're doing everything we can to work with the delegation. The Lieutenant Governor was in Washington. We're putting together money from ESD, $500,000 to provide resources because it's a potentially devastating situation to those localities. But I don't have any new news, no.
You personally had any contacts with anyone in the White House or the Pentagon about this?
We're talking to people in Washington, and we're talking to the delegation.
I mean, personally, have you reached out to them?
Yes, I have.
Governor, on Monday, your office had a press conference for the farm brewery license, and I know for the past couple of years there's been a bill already out there for a farm brewery license, and I was just wondering if your bill had any differences, because there's been no, the language hasn't been released.
I don't know, to tell you the truth, but I can get you an analysis of our bill versus the other bill. Who did the other bill, do you know? Which bill? All right, we'll find out.
Governor, your executive budget calls for consolidation of DOT offices, and the Long Island Assembly delegation sent you a letter on Tuesday asking to reconsider doing this, joining New York City and Long Island. Are concerned that New York City will crowd out and Long Island get shortchanged. Have you responded to them? Do you think?
I haven't seen the letter, but I will find the letter, but I haven't seen it.
Governor, support for casino gambling in the independent polls seems to be slipping, and I'm wondering what you feel you need to do to get people on board with your plan, and whether you think it's important soon or at any particular time to specify where you would want non-Indian casinos to be located.
Why do you think the casino support could be slipping? I don't know that there's been a lot of things that have happened that would cause the support to slip. You know, sometimes you just get a variance in numbers. I think we will have a challenge next year when we go to the people on this issue to overcome an initial skepticism that people have. You know, when you say we should go into the gambling business, we should change the Constitution to allow gambling, I think the initial reaction is negative. You know, gambling is at best a 50-50 proposition, pardon the pun, right? So I have no doubt there's going to be questions from the public, and I understand why. Now, my argument is different. You know, I say we're in a state of denial. It's not whether or not we should be in the gaming business. We're already in the gaming business. We just don't call it the gaming business. We came up with cute devices to get around the Constitution, in truth. We call them racinos. But by the way, only we call them racinos in the law. If you look at how they're advertised and what it says on the venue, it says casino. You know, this is a myth that we've created. So we have casinos all across the state. They're called casinos. We have 29,000 gaming machines, more than in Atlantic City. And we say, but we're not in the gaming business. It's just an illusion that we have created. And it's a dangerous illusion because we're not I believe, regulating, protecting, and taxing the industry the way it should be. And if you admit where you are, we are in the gaming business, then you can actually do it right. So there's no doubt there will be an initial skepticism, and it's going to be a dialogue to overcome that with facts, and I believe it's a powerful case when people hear the facts. But they have to hear the facts, there's no doubt about that.
The state needs to launch an advertising campaign or put any money into an effort to educate people?
This is all next year, Eric, and we'll figure it out next year.
Kevin, if we admit to having casinos in the state, does that also pose a problem for the Indian casinos right now that are withholding their tax money because of the conflict of the exclusivity agreements?
Well, we would admit that we have casinos on Native American reservations. And I think we say that.
The racinos are basically casinos, so.
Racinos, yeah, and if you look at how they're advertised, we call it a racino in this room. Pull up to one of the racinos, look up at the sign, and see what it says. It says casino. Yes, Laura?
Sorry, my voice isn't as loud as, I can't always shout.
Plus, they're very aggressive, they're hyper-aggressive on that side. Yeah. You want to stay away from that side anyway, it's not worth it. Call me and I'll answer the question. You don't have to do what they do to do.
In a federal trial last week and this week, federal corruption trial in White Plains, testified that the Deputy Majority Leader, Tom Libous, may have improperly used his position to get a job for his son. I was wondering, do you think that JCOPE should, or some other investigatory body should look into that?
It's up to JCOPE or some other investigatory body.
So you have in the past with the IG, for instance, suggested that it might be worth looking into to determine right or wrong whether something inappropriate had happened?
Yeah, I have in the past, mostly when I was the Attorney General in the past. And it is appropriate, an appropriate area for the Attorney General. It'd be an appropriate area for JCOPE to comment on, the Attorney General to comment on. But for me, I don't believe it's an appropriate area to comment on. I only know what I've seen in the newspaper. I don't have any more facts than that. But you'd have to ask JCOPE or the Attorney General or some other entity.
Does it concern you what you read in the newspaper, given you've made ethics a major platform of your election?
Well, you'd have to know the facts, Ken, you know. I've been around enough to know I wouldn't rely on just a newspaper article to make a statement like that.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, guys, thanks very much.